haven't quite decided yet.
We're live.
It's not.
We are live.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Dixon. I'm the Vice Chair for the General Committee. I'm calling the meeting to order tonight, March the 11th, for the City of Hendersonville. I'd like to go around the room and have the folks, we have a big crowd tonight, introduce themselves.
Rachel Collins, Alderman, Ward 5.
Jason Gallo, Administrative Services Director.
Jeff Sassy, Alderman Ward 3.
Mark Evans, Alderman Ward 6.
Jesse Akron, Chief of Operations.
Eddie Robertson, Ward 6.
Greg Sorey, Director of Codes.
Scotty Bush, Hendersonville Fire.
Lance Ray,
Lance Ray, City Attorney, sorry.
Mayor Jamie Cleary.
Casey Lamar.
thank you.
Communications.
Matt Elliott, Vice President, Local 3460. Matthew Cole, A-Shift Steward, HFD.
Good to have you here.
Yes.
Greg, I'm so sorry.
Greg Yandell, Resident, owner of Hendersonville Ace Hardware.
Great, thank you. Can I get a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
And I second that. All those in favor, aye. Okay, and did we have a chance to look over the minutes?
Yes, I move to approve the minutes as submitted.
Second that, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, so we've approved our minutes. And citizens' comments, we have Greg Handel, 110 Glen Haven Way, and Hendersonville.
Yes.
You have the floor.
Oh, well, so tonight I know that you are going to be discussing an ordinance on vacant property. And I wanted to come and just spend a very brief time with you discussing, as first a resident, of the impact of having a significant amount of vacant properties in the city, but secondarily, also the impact that it has on a local business owner. Many of you know, especially down on the west end part of town, we have a significant number of vacant buildings that have been vacant for quite some time. And when you start doing research into those properties, what you realize is most of those properties that stand vacant are not owned by local residents. So there's not a, if you will, a sense of urgency with those landlords to keep those buildings up. There's not a sense of urgency to get those buildings rented. There's not a sense of urgency for them to stay in compliance with codes, both fire, one building in particular has multiple windows out, et cetera. So it becomes an eyesore for that part of town. And I think 2 years ago, we started looking at ways to encourage property owners to stay in compliance with everything we talked about, but also encourage them to either rent the buildings or sell the property. The downside of this is that, and I know most of the property owners think, well, it's a part of my portfolio, and just naturally, because property increases in value, just naturally the property is going to increase in value, so it just becomes a part of their portfolio, and at some point in time they'll sell it. But for us, it actually suppresses property value, because when someone comes to town and they look at certain parts of town, and you drive by a certain part of town and you see vacant buildings that aren't being kept up, not being rented, there's a suppression in that value, even though that landlord knows that over time that value ultimately does in fact increase in value property. So that's where the rub comes in. For the city, it is difficult for us to look at that as you go by. And as a business owner on that part of town, obviously for me, I've personally put a lot of money into a successful business on that part of town. So we know that, you know, on west end of Hendersonville, you can have a very thriving, successful business. But on the downside, when someone new comes to town and they don't know the area in particular, they see vacant buildings and they begin to question, well, is this a depressed part of town? Is this a part of town that the city is walking away from? And so it starts, this whole question around what's the city doing to make sure that this part of town is maintained. And it's not just West Main, it can be anywhere. So really the idea is to develop some type of program that encourages, but fairly encourages, a landlord to keep the building up and ultimately try to keep the building either rented or sell it so that can be a productive part of our town. which means, more employment, more people that come to town have a job, they have another thriving business, goods, services, et cetera. And so I've seen a lot of other towns across the country that operate some type of program like what you're going to talk about tonight. They do it very successfully and encourage property owners in a way that, somewhat forces them to keep the building up, or, it's almost a carrot and a stick type of situation. And so when I read through the ordinance as it's laid out today, I'm just going to say this. From a resident and a business owner, I think it's a very fair ordinance. There's certainly opportunity in there for the city to gain some revenue from that, but at the same time, financially encourage the landowner to, keep the building up to codes, keep it looking nice, try to keep it rented. And then there's an opportunity for that landlord to claw back, if you will, any fines levied for not taking care of the property.
Great.
So, okay, very well, thank you. So I think as written, the ordinance looks very fair. It's encouraging on both sides, encouraging the city to go after landlords that don't take care of their building, but it's also encouraging to landlords to take care of it and then be able to claw back any money.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Thank you. So now we are moving on to ordinances and resolutions. The first three are related to codes. And we have the reading of ordinance 2025-03, which is bringing our fire code up to the revised edition of our International Fire Code. 04, which is for building and maintenance code, a revised edition. And 05, which is our property maintenance codes. So who would like to speak on that? Greg? Thank you.
So I'm hoping tonight that the committee passes this recommendation to consider the adopted 2021 code. So every 3 to 4 years, we have to adopt new codes, and it's based on a state law, a TCA law that says we have to be current within the newest published edition of the newest book, which is the 2024. We actually have a year that we could play around with, but everyone's going to the 21, and all the architects, engineers, developers that I've been dealing with, they're already using the 21 in other parts of the nation. So the whole intent is to stay in line with the state's code and not have them intervene and where we won't be an exempt status of doing our own thing here. So basically the new codes for fire, we're doing fire, building, and then the property maintenance. So the building also includes many other code books as well. That's listed in our Title 12. And we do have a few amendments that we're continuing on to pass on that we've had before. Really, the property maintenance code was probably the one that was adjusted the most to tailor more or less the codes enforcement officers to help do their job. So we added a section in there for to speed up the demo process. And then we also put in a new section on open storage, which we never had. So,
Okay.
And then we also adopted a few appendixes as well. And the appendix A is the standards of how you board a structure. So we never had that in place. So now we can have, if we ever have come down to that, we'll have a uniform way of boarding structures. They just can't use whatever to board up a window or door, So, but like I said, this is the fire code. There's really not a whole lot of changes. I didn't
And I appreciate the cheat sheet.
And I can,
Yes.
whoever needs one, I can,
It might be good that when this comes to BOMA, that we
Okay.
have that
we can throw
available
that on.
for everybody.
If you maybe email it to the whole board.
We can do that as
before
well.
the
Yeah.
meeting.
We can do that as well. But, nothing too, major that's, nothing significant, that's out of the ordinary. That's gonna really affect any of the contractors or anyone, if we do adopt
Great.
it, so.
Great, and it doesn't impact our fiscal bottom line. Do you have any questions?
I just want to say we appreciate your department. We don't have, as aldermen, we don't have a lot of interaction with you except when we get complaints that need enforcement. And those are always handled fairly,
I appreciate it.
and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I move that we accept items 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
Ordinance. Do I need to say the ordinance?
I'll say it, 2025-03, 04, and 05. And I will second that.
We're moving to vote with a positive recommendation.
Positive recommendation, and I'll second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Moving on to item number 4, which is reading of ordinance 2025-06, an ordinance to amend Hendersonville's municipal code for business, peddlers, solicitors, et cetera, relative to shopping carts. And Mayor Clary,
Sure. On Evanston, I want to talk a little bit as well. Currently, we occasionally see somebody going down Gallatin Road or essentially stealing shopping carts. You can find one behind Drake's Creek Park, I have no doubt right now. Probably Sandersbury Park as well. And the issue is that very often the retailers, they don't really care. But the shopping carts, first they stole it, second, they're probably going to be used in coordination for another crime. So that's why I think we need to do this.
the thing that sticks out to me in this is that the store, the establishment, the business owner is getting stolen from, basically. And then if law enforcement sees the cart, they notify the business owner that they have to come retrieve the cart or it gets taken somewhere. And then if they don't get it within, is it 24 hours? If they don't pick it up within 24 hours, I think that's what I read, that they get fined. So I feel like they're getting fined for getting stolen from. So I have a little bit of an issue with that. I feel like, and also there's some addition of adding QR code signage. And if we have smaller establishments like, is it HGL? Is that the smaller grocery store? I'm sorry if I'm not saying that. Cash Saver now, you're right, okay.
Yep.
Wow, been around long enough to know that what was there before. That's pretty good. So I feel like we're hurting that business, and I don't want to hurt any of the establishments, especially the smaller businesses. And then do we have a spot at the police department for these things to hang out while somebody comes in? Or are we expected that the police are going to pick them up? Or are they just going to notify them, hey, you got a shopping cart from Target over here in front of Kroger?
Typically, what we do is ask Public Works to get them in Public Works. It's a matter.
Okay.
So how much is the impoundment fee?
So
It's specified.
I assume it'd be $50. I mean, is that-
I saw
There's a
that.
$50 fine for
So, yeah.
violations, but then it references the impoundment fee in
Impoundment
different
fee, yep.
language. So I wasn't sure if that was the same,
Yeah.
$50. And,
At maximum, I guess.
Yeah, $50 maximum, but it allowed whoever is going to administer this to set a fee for it.
and then along the same lines about the signage that you were talking about, the sign, it would be required, and it says the ordinance shall take effect at the earliest date allowed by law, which is the day after you sign it. And that's not time for people to get a sign. So I was thinking that at the least, obviously we don't make changes during committee, but that it probably needs to go into effect 90 days or 60 days or something like that.
What if you said It's published July 1st. That's where the last state laws go into effect.
And we can send a letter to everybody who has a grocery cart. And, I had not thought about it from the perspective of being fined and stolen from.
Yeah.
So maybe if they are willing to press charges, they don't get a fine.
Right.
And if they don't want to press charges, then they get fined. I don't know,
And I
but I
did
had not thought about that.
speak to a couple of police officers this weekend, and they indicated that generally they tear the signage off of the carts if they're gonna take them somewhere, especially folks who are taking them to use them for personal use, like homelessness or to use it to carry their
Mhm.
items. So it's very hard to determine, did this come from Target? Did this come from Kroger? You know, where did this come from? Walmart. Because they will tear all that off so that it,
So are you thinking,
I mean,
neutral or positive recommendation?
I'm thinking a neutral.
Right.
What do you think?
I think it needs some tweaking, so
Yeah.
at this point, I'm fine.
I just want to say that, if I may, I like the spirit of this and that we need to do this. And I think, I understand what you're saying about
We're hurting the business.
double jeopardy kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think that if they know that there's a cart out there that's one of theirs, they're going to have an employee that's going to go and pick it up. I just feel like they would.
I agree with you, and I have seen after hours carts of their own drifting out into city roads that they just didn't go back out and get them.
The
You know,
wind
it-
can catch them.
now that's the kind of thing I think that we need to say, hey, your carts need to go inside your establishment when you're closed.
Be secure.
Yeah. So I think there's a little tweaking we could do, and I really don't want to make an amendment here, but we'll leave it for, giving Mayor Clary to decide how you approach it with Alma.
Mark and I can see if we can come up with something.
Okay, that's great.
So I move that we send this to Alma with a neutral recommendation.
And I second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. The next one is number 5, reading of ordinance 2025-07, an ordinance to amend Hendersonville's municipal code, Title 9 for business peddlers, solicitors, and as relative to panhandling. Who would like to speak to this one?
Just sort of some First Amendment issues, so it might be best if Lance.
Okay.
So we were careful to, and I modeled this after some other cities because there are a lot of First Amendment issues involved. But
Right.
it goes into great detail as to define aggressive panhandling and passive panhandling, and where some of those things, or each of those things may be prohibited for public safety concerns such as medians and then streets or near the highway.
Yeah.
Personal security concerns, which might be next to an ATM or something along that, and then heightened personal privacy concerns, which could be someone is sitting outside at a restaurant or we try our best to try to explain and define everything.
Right.
So
Let me ask you, we have certain organizations that hold a day to stand like at stoplights and with their jugs to ash.
Yeah.
And I can name them, but I won't name them. You know who they are. With this, I hold my breath because I feel like I'm going to hit somebody when I'm going through there. And that's what I was thinking when I read these about being close proximity and danger and that kind of thing.
Specifically, the intersection of Indian Lake and Yates.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about that.
Yes.
Is that considered high traffic and not
It is.
acceptable?
it is, I was thinking, do they have to get a permit? I was thinking they're a permit.
So they do have to get a permit to do that. However, there are many that will go out there for a couple hours Saturday morning, and I see them, I call the police because I know they don't have a permit. I think I actually signed it. It's been a long time since I have. And Mark and I talked about this. Do you want to add anything about that?
I'm not on this end of town much anymore, but I agree. That's what I was concerned about, that main intersection. That's where you see most of them. And with there being 4 and 5 lanes or
Right.
more there, I just don't see that's a safety concern for me. That's
Me
why
too, me
I
too.
want to include this.
I think it covers it, but you might want to expand on it a little bit, but I like the idea of the,
And when I read the list of things that are considered aggressive panhandling, I've experienced almost all of those, not in Hendersonville though.
Right.
And if those are not something that our police department currently has the ability to press charges for, they should. So, I mean, nobody should block your exit or your path to your car. Nobody should be able to touch you. Nobody should be able to cuss at you, and it should be illegal. I'm sure you've experienced that. So.
in
Yeah.
Nashville, yeah.
Mhm, yeah. So I would like to send this with a positive recommendation.
And I will second that. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Moving on to the reading of ordinance 2025-08, an ordinance to amend Hendersonville's municipal code, Title 12, building, utility, et cetera, codes relative to the registration of vacant commercial and industrial buildings.
I have questions.
Do we want to have someone speak on this first? Before your question.
Sure, oh, yes.
Okay.
This came out of Jackson, Tennessee, a couple of years ago, maybe 4 years ago, they enacted this. And it worked exactly the way they wanted to. They didn't want to start finding a bunch of property owners. What they wanted to engage the property owners so that they could help those folks out and get the property owners, a lot of them out of town, get them moving on the buildings. And they actually have none on the registry right now. And that's what we're sort of hoping for. Alderman Evans did catch a typo on page 67. That's something we'll fix. You see what it says, section 1, on page 67, it should say chapter 15 instead of chapter 15. So, something we'll fix.
What about after 10, 11, and 12 is blank under the chapters? What is that about?
That's how our code currently reads. There's no
11 and
there's
no
no
12.
chapter 11 and no chapter 12.
Okay, all right. So they were deleted for some reason in the past.
Yes.
Okay.
So I like this, and the thing that I want to know before we go to vote on that is I can name buildings in my ward that would seem to be involved with this. I can certainly name buildings on the west end of town. My ward's far east. I don't think I should probably say, but a lot of them were impacted by the tornado. And it's been far more than 90 days. How long will they have to submit a plan?
So we actually just covered that with the ordinances that Greg brought up. And we've changed it because it was sort of a gray area before. And
I
So-
noticed a lot of this,
Yeah.
we're going to address the issues where we've had
Mhm.
stragglers,
if it's a natural disaster, they get more time.
90 days.
Greg, what are we?
So natural disaster, they get 6 months.
Okay.
That's to board up, and then 12 months to knock it down.
6 months to board?
Yeah. So before it was
2
a
years.
year, up to 2 years.
Oh, okay.
So now if it's a natural disaster, you can board up to 6 months, then you have a year to make a decision. You don't knock it down, you got to figure something out. So that's how we got it written in here.
What did I read in here that made?
If it's not a natural
Where is that?
disaster, it's 3
So that's,
instead of 6 and
I
12.
saw it.
I didn't read 90 days.
No, I know, but I'm just trying to find it.
I know we talked about it.
I don't know, I won't be able to find it,
Yeah.
but 6 months seems like to board it up and secure it, 6 months seems excessive.
You may not
But you
have
like
that the way
6
I have
months to
it.
board it up and
Well, that's
a
only
year to
natural,
tear it down.
that's natural disaster only. So if it's not a natural disaster,
What if
it's
it's
3
fire?
months to board up and 6 months to knock down.
Okay.
So natural disaster is different.
And fire is not a natural disaster, or is that?
Well,
It says in here-
Category.
Oh, Go ahead, Greg, I'm sorry.
Let's see.
Is it under 12, 15, we're on page 71,
71, yeah, that's what I was looking at.
under G exemption?
Yep. G1, it says fire or extreme weather conditions.
Yeah.
Can I interject from the
Yes,
fire's
please.
perspective? So the fire perspective, if it's a business that's open and operating, we don't leave the property until the property owner's there and they're gonna secure their valuables, whatever goods they're selling inside that building. We did have a conversation at the staff meeting on the vacant buildings. I would also like for us to start identifying those for the safety of my staff. If they're vacant buildings and we know that there's nothing of value or anybody in that building, we would simply not make entry into that building to try to fight a fire. Way too many firefighters lose their lives going into vacant buildings to fight fire to save nothing.
Excellent.
So with that, we don't turn property over until a property owner shows up or a manager, and then they are responsible for getting a company there to board their stuff up. And usually it's done within 12 hours. I can say that pretty confidently in our city, that most business owners are very responsive to securing their property within 12 hours.
Great.
I wanted to, Mayor Clary is probably pretty familiar with how Rock Castle was vacant for some time, and it was a party place. And they got it on fire one time, and the scars are still there on the fireplace. And thinking of Bradford Burials, and I know that it says that government is exempt, but would a historic home be considered commercial or industrial, or is a residential historic home?
I would think it'd be residential. That'd be,
I don't think it's commercial, it's definitely not industrial. So I don't know that it would apply.
Vacant buildings are dangerous. People don't need to, but go in there, and it's very tempting for kids and others, I'm sure.
Yes.
So, and the economic impact that it has on our community, this is all
Yes.
good.
On Main Street, it used to be a bank and now it's a knick-knack store. I'm so sorry. It's right there at Starbucks. What is the name? The Pop Shelf? Before it was Pop Shelf, I saw people going into that building with a busted out bottom of the glass, and I know they were sleeping there. Oh, please. But, and that building was there forever without any consequence. And I'm glad that something is thriving there now. But I'm gonna make a recommendation for the state of Alma for a positive recommendation.
Yes, I second that.
And so all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now let's move on to reading of a resolution, 2025-07. This is a resolution to adopt a decorative street sign replacement grant program. This came to us last month, and we deferred it, and now it's coming back to us because we were looking for a bit more information. And who wants to talk, Jamie or Jesse?
I'm happy to do it, or Alderman Evans.
Go ahead, Alder.
Okay. So, most subdivisions that have been built the past couple of years, really past since 2000, they put up decorative street posts, decorative signs. They've got the nice decorative post there, and then the stop sign, and then above that, sort of some nice brackets where they put the street signs. Usually, the street signs are nicer than what we put together. We just have the standard green reflective signs, nothing special. What happens though is that those signs, the actual signs that have the lettering on there, they fade just like ours do, and they wear out or they fall, and they need to be replaced. Right now, the HOA has the option of going out and replacing those, but we also have the city also has an obligation to make sure that people know where to turn and where those roads are. And so at some point, the city, we go out and replace those. A great example is over Bonita Parkway in Cumberland Place subdivision, where we just replace them with their own. They don't match. And you go to the next intersection and they have the older one, the more decorative one, and then you have ours. And that's certainly reasonable that we would replace those without a decorative one. That's reasonable. But what we also have the opportunity to do is partner with the HOAs that may want to replace their decorative sign with a decorative sign. Since they're essentially saving us money, because then we don't have to put our standard green reflective sign up there. This would say, hey, if it was gonna cost us $50 or $80 or $100 to replace that sign, here's that money if you choose to replace it with a decorative sign. Like I said, they're saving us money. We will make sure the HOAs know this. They may choose not to, but I talked to the HOA presidents 2 Sundays ago, and they were interested in this. Of course, a lot of them get the complaints from their residents. When are you going to replace that? So Eddie and Mark, Alderman Evans, Alderman Robertson live in a subdivision that has decorative signs. Yours a little bit older than his, and it's very apparent when you go see some of the older ones versus when you see some of the new ones. That they're gonna have to be replaced too.
I like that it's, the way it's written now, that it's a reimbursement. And I like that there's an inspection before the reimbursement and that it's ADA compliant.
Yeah.
So it probably won't be the exact sign that they have because it will still need to be that larger font. So, unless you have any comments, I
do not.
Send it with a positive recommendation.
And I second that. All those in favor? And then item number 8, reading of a resolution 2025-11, a resolution approving and establishing a policy for certain secondary employment for Hendersonville Fire Department employees. Number 8. Who would like to talk about this?
I will.
Oh, okay.
So this is a program that allows our fire department personnel off the city's clock to utilize HFD equipment, utilize UTV. If a vendor wants them to come and say they're going to do a tournament at a park or put on an event at a park and they want to utilize HFD to be there to run the UTV. So this gives the fire personnel a mechanism to be employed after hours, so secondary employment directly through that vendor. And then the city authorizes the use of the UTV. There's a rental fee for the UTV that gets paid directly to the city. That's $75 a day. And the UTV will show up with supplies. And then the price that the staff are going to work would be negotiated. But it's very similar to what our police department does. If you see them out on the Sunday to church working traffic or inside the church working for church, they have a secondary employment agreement. So the city enters into an agreement with the vendor, and then the employee signs an acknowledgement form that they're not working for the city, they're not covered under our insurance or workers' comp. And so from a legal perspective, we kind of have that covered, but it's a mechanism to provide the services that we typically provide in the fire service at no cost to the city, and the vendor or the tournament event producer can just hire that directly through the fire department.
Were we doing this kind of thing before, just never really had it in the resolution?
No, we weren't. We were with PD. We just
Right.
never extended it to fire.
Okay.
We were running UTV a lot on our own in the park, but this gives a mechanism for the UTV to run in the park if the tournament director or the event, whoever's putting the event on, requests it. And then they can just pay if they want it 1 day or 2 days, and they can just pay for that. It's not when our guys are on the clock.
Okay.
Now, there are some times we're contractually obligated to, and we will provide it. That's at no cost. Anytime we're into an agreement with, a tournament to provide it, we will. That will be on the clock, but these would be for secondary or after hours type of employment.
Okay. Question?
I do. So does this mean, I know that we suspended the UTV when it required overtime, but does this mean that we would no longer provide the UTV to our residents?
So there was discussion about not wanting to use overtime for the UTV, but we never implemented a policy to do that. So what we've, we have an overtime budget and we have a budget for personnel. So that's our constraint. There's no policy that says we can't do it, and we have done, but we have to be within our budget. So it has limited the ability to use it at times. So this is really a mechanism for it. Maybe we're at the end of the budget or we're tight on the budget and a tournament wants it, so they can hire it directly if they want.
And
There's
we haven't had the staff to manage.
Yeah, so this would be after hours. So if you work, maybe the B shift, that's the A shift that day, you could come in, it's not your shift, but you could work a secondary employment and pick that shift up.
So, but we will still offer, we're not suspending the service that we've had in the past, where we've offered the UTV to our leagues, for example, or the 3rd of July celebration.
No, we have not implemented a policy to restrict UTV use. We just had to work within our budget. I mean, there's been discussion about not wanting to use overtime for the UTV. That has been discussion that's,
I've had limited but some negative feedback about this concerning. Does this mean you're not going to provide anymore because we haven't seen it much recently, blah, blah, blah. But it's surprising to have any feedback at the committee level when it hasn't gone to Roma yet. So I'm a little bit concerned that what am I going to hear from people about the way that it's going to implement them? What would the hourly rate for the EMT be? How is that established?
So that would be, typically it's starting at $35. I think that's what PD does, and that's what, that could be negotiated. That would be handled, through the fire department. But typically 35 would probably be a starting rate. But certainly, I'm sure the people who would service UTV would be open to more than 35.
When we have leagues, not tournaments from out of town, but our kids are playing at the parks and we have traffic control set up there at DMS, is that what the police are doing on their after hours, or is that through the police department provided?
That's through the police department.
Provided,
Yes, ma'am.
but we don't, so that's where I'm getting hung up, because one of the things that was said to me is we're providing, and I want to clarify that. The park is crowded enough that we're providing traffic control, but it's not crowded enough that we're providing the UTV with an EMT on it, even though you can't get into the park with an ambulance. So I would like to send this with a neutral recommendation and learn more about it.
Okay, I can get on board with that. That sounds good to me. So if you'll
I move to send it with
second
neutral.
that, and all those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay, now we have reading of resolution 2025-12. It's a resolution expressing the opposition of the city of Hendersonville to state's efforts to restrict or preempt local land use decisions. And Eddie, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us a flavor of this.
Several years ago, there was some discussion at the federal level, federal preemption of state authority, of local authority. There's been very little discussion of that now with the new administration, so I think that's probably out of bounds. But we have seen a bill that has been filed in the General Assembly, Tennessee legislature, that would take away some of our zoning authority. Right now, we have zoning authority to determine what property is zoned for R1, and further down, apartments and so forth. And a bill that's been introduced in the General Assembly would be to take away some of that authority. And I think it's important for us to fight for local zoning decisions being made by local elected officials, because we're closest to the people. So this would be an expression of opposition to preemption, and we would distribute it to our General Assembly and also with TML, and fight those attempts to take away our jurisdiction. We don't want the state coming in and dictating, on this piece of property, you have to put this and you have to put this. We want those decisions to be held by the locals.
Right, and the county's doing something similar.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yes, I read about that, and I know it's coming up for discussion in Gallatin, but I don't know what they're up to.
I just don't know who is behind that bill at the legislature. I can guess, but I won't elaborate. But I just think that we need to fight.
What's the reason for that? Why would they want to do that?
Well, the reason that is given is for affordable housing.
Mhm.
Is that, instead of making it all R1 subdivision like Mansker or like Alden Creek,
You have to include
in
that.
new ones, you have to also include multifamily zoning in that R1.
Anybody have any questions? I think this is very important, and I would like to make the motion that we move this with a positive recommendation. And
Second, sorry.
Great, so all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
The last on our agenda is, under ordinances and resolutions, is the reading of Resolution 2025-13. It's a resolution inviting the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System, which is TCRS, to hold an information session for public safety personnel on the Bridge State Retirement Plan and establish a voting surveying process to gauge consensus. Alderman Sassy, would you like to speak about this?
Yeah, sure, happy to. Spoken to TCRS already, they're more willing to come out and present to our public safety about the bridge program, answer any questions that they have, in a open forum environment, and just as an outside party who, they facilitate the bridge program, but they just want to provide the information. They do a very good job of it. So this is just inviting them in here to be able to express this to our public safety, and then allowing them to inform us in an anonymous way on what they want. And then Bowman can make a determination and take that under advisement when we're discussing the bridge, and if that's something we want to implement.
So from TSRA, what did I say that right? TCRS, it's only for public safety workers, the bridge program.
That's right.
So couldn't be for all of the city, okay. I'm probably gonna be unpopular with this, but my concern, and I want this to happen too, but when we have them come in and we do a survey, and then we publish the results of the survey, but we can't afford to pay for it, then what? What do we look like then? And I just think that we need more strategy around how we move forward. Because this is gonna be, I think somebody quoted $1 million a year that we're gonna have to come up with. And we're also looking, okay, but could be, by the time we get there. And we're also looking at what can we do to help with healthcare for all of this, the city employees. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think that my proposal is we need to get some heads together and talk about how we say no, even if the answer is yes, we want it, if we can't afford it.
Well, that's definitely a discussion that we can have at that point. This is just trying to get, because there's so much information that we don't have about this program. We don't really understand it, and so this gives us the opportunity to understand.
I looked at it on their website. It's pretty, it's explainable to me, but maybe it looks like it's pretty concise with all the information they have out there. But people like to ask questions, and so bring them in and let us do that. But let's, maybe we don't call it a survey. But, I don't know. I just,
From my
because
perspective,
I don't want people to think this is an outcome, yes or no, just for a survey.
Yeah.
We can't sell it that way, because that's not gonna be how it's gonna be.
from my perspective, I hear from people who are telling me, oh, the bridge does this, and then the next person says, oh, it does that. Only one of you is right. So,
Right.
I think that the education component is really
Okay.
important. And then, once everybody actually does know what it is, because I feel like now people just really don't, but they all think they do. Because that's how our life tends to be though.
Right.
Kind of like deer. Everybody know everything about deer, and they're all wrong. But, yeah, I shouldn't
You gotta
have brought
ask
that
them.
up, another
Yeah,
story.
We gotta go right to the
Yeah.
source.
But then if we survey and find that, we do have a consensus, which we may not, but if we do have a consensus, and this is something that will be valuable for our employees, and how valuable it will be, then this is a big transition. It might be a 5-year goal.
Mhm. Right.
And I think that we have to start somewhere, and education and asking for our people who would be impacted. I mean, you're impacting when they can retire. It's pretty personal, so we have to ask them
Right.
their thoughts on it. I certainly would not make that decision for 240-ish people, I think, without asking them. And not all of them are gonna talk to me individually, so, I think it's just the reasonable first step, and then we can, and I know that, because I had some questions, and I know that Jesse and Jason have met with an actuary to try and figure out the cost. There might be some things that would offset that cost and savings that we would experience, and what the net result would be. So we don't really have enough information to make a decision or set a goal or anything at this time.
Right.
But that this is where we start. And I think what we've learned, and will continue to learn tonight probably, is that we need to do better for our people
Right, absolutely.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And this is something big that we need to look at.
Right.
So I would like to move it with a positive recommendation.
I would second that.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And do we have any other discussion or other business? Can I get a motion
Move to adjourn.
Yes, we made it in 48 minutes. Thank you so much.
Well done.